Hello, today we're going to talk about Area of Study 2, which is English is in contact. Okay, so this is the key knowledge. Factors in the development of English as a world language, distinctive features of national and regional varieties of English, the distinctive features of pidgins, creoles, and English as a lingua franca, the role of language as an expression of cultures and worldviews, including representations of worldviews in texts. The concepts of linguistic relativism and determinism, the processes of language maintenance, shift, and reclamation, the cultural and social effects of language change and loss, with particular reference to Australian Aboriginal languages, and metalanguage to discuss the global spread of English. The key skills that you'll be expected to learn how to do and use are to define key linguistic concepts as they relate to the development of English as a world language, to use key concepts in metalanguage appropriately to identify, describe, and analyse the different varieties of English that have helped develop as a result of the spread of English, to explore and analyse the effects of the global spread of English as reflected in texts. Alright, we're going to look at some metalanguage to start off with. So, a lingua franca is a language that's adopted as a common language between speakers whose native languages are different. A pidgin is a grammatically simplified form of a language used for communication between people not sharing a common language. It's usually a mix of a colonial language and a native language. A creole is a language created with elements of multiple languages. It's a complete language used in a community and it's acquired by children as their native language. We're going to look at all of these in a lot more detail, so just get the definitions down and we will come back to them later. Code switching is the practice of alternating between two or more languages or varieties of language in conversation. Language reclamation is an attempt to halt or reverse the decline or death of a language or to revive an extinct one. Those involved in this process include linguists, cultural and community groups, and governments. Language maintenance is the use of a minor language by a speech community despite competition with the dominant or majority language. Linguistic relativism is the idea that the language a person speaks has an influence on their thought processes and their cognition. Linguistic determinism, however, is the idea that language and its structures limit and determine human knowledge of thought, as well as thought processes such as categorization, memory, and perception. Alright, why is English global? We're going to talk about the globalization of English and why it is so widespread. At the end of the 18th century, only around 10 million people spoke English. Differences in Englishes at this time could be astounding. People speaking one variation of English might not be able to understand someone speaking another variety. Now, around 2 billion people around the world speak English in some capacity. Alright, so this is some of the factors that have led to the globalization of English. So in the 1800s, British imperialism leads to the spread of English as a lingua franca. Basically, this means that Britain was going around invading a whole lot of different countries that didn't have any exposure to English and forcing English upon them. So now, if we look at Australia as an example, no one spoke English in Australia before colonisation, and now it's the most widespread language in Australia. In the 1900s, America takes over from Britain as the leading nation. So they had a lot of political power and still do, and they also have a lot of cultural power. So things like Hollywood and American music are widespread across the globe, not just in America. In the 1980s, the internet takes off and becomes integral to many areas of life. And it's important to note that English was the language of the internet. Pretty much everything that was on the internet was published in English, and there also wasn't, like we have translation services available on the internet now, they didn't exist then. In the 2000s, English takes off as the common language of global business, so they needed a language that companies in Tokyo could use to talk to companies in Hong Kong. Why do people learn English today? So these are some of the reasons why it's important, why people think it's important to learn English in this day and age. First of all, knowledge is created and disseminated, meaning given out or made available, in English in science, technology, business, communication, and design. The academic world functions in English. There's the globalization of business, so what we spoke about just then, that to do trade across countries you need to have a common language. Travel, international corporations, and the international language of the sea and the air. So basically they needed a language that everyone could use to make sure that planes and boats didn't crash. So they needed to have that information available to everyone who was flying a plane or who was, on a Navy ship or whatever. It needed to be able to be understood by everyone. So they needed to have one language that everyone was expected to converse in. Okay, English is now the official language in 81 countries. The spread of English, due to factors such as colonialism, has led to the development of many different varieties of English, all with distinct pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, and conventions. The rise of these new Englishes has been a major motivation for establishing English as the dominant world language. These new Englishes, for example Singapore English, are growing so quickly that there are now more speakers of English varieties than there are native English speakers. Alright, English is a lingua franca. English has become a common means of communication between speakers of different first languages. Lingua francas have been used across the globe for centuries, but English as a lingua franca, or ELF, is particularly interesting because of the scope in which it's used, both geographically and socially. A typical ELF conversation might involve an Italian speaker asking a Parisian for directions to the Eiffel Tower in English. Okay, I'd like you to pause here and brainstorm 5 possible reasons why English might have become the global language over a language like Punjabi, for example, or any other language you choose. Extensive technological advances in the 21st century have enabled instant global communication, breaking the barriers of space and time and thereby changing the nature of globalization. Its presence in large parts of the world due to colonization has led to it becoming the main language in which global trade, business, and cultural interactions take place. ELF is a unique lingua franca because of its global spread, its highly diverse nature, and its interactions which include native speakers. Alright, language and globalization. The first thing to know about it is that language and globalization affect each other. The reshaping of communities due to globalization means that there's been considerable changes in the English language. As English encounters new communities and cultures, it's shaped and adapted by those encounters to be used by local communities for local and international communication. Consequently, hybrid forms develop in which new words are created, while simultaneously existing words may be assigned new meanings. This leads to a constant process of linguistic change. Okay, we're going to look at some of the features of ELF. So the way that English is used as a lingua franca is heavily dependent on the specific situation of use. Generally speaking, ELF interactions concentrate on function rather than form. In other words, communicative efficiency, that is, getting the message across, is more important than being correct. So basically that means that as long as the person that you're speaking to understands what you're trying to say, that's more important than actually getting your verb tenses correct or making your subject agree with your verb and so on. Or your verb agree with your subject, I should say. As a consequence, ELF interactions are very often hybrid. Speakers accommodate to each other's cultural backgrounds and may also use code switching into other languages they know. Alright, some features of ELF include a shift in the use of articles, including some preference for zero articles, as in our countries have signed agreements about this. Invariant interrogative tags, as in you're very busy today, aren't you? And use of other similar universal forms. Treating who and which as interchangeable relative pronouns, as in the picture who or a person which. Shifts of patterns of preposition use, for example, we have to study about. The preference for bare and or full infinitives over the use of gerunds, as in I'm looking forward to see you tomorrow instead of I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. And increased explicitness, for example, how much time instead of how long. Okay, we're going to have a quick look at varieties of English. So first of all, there are categories for establishing Englishes. So the first is location, and this relates to the geographical setting of a speech community. For example, New Zealand English, Australian English, Singaporean English. Ethnicity. These are varieties of English that are associated with different ethnic groups. For example, Aboriginal English, Bengali English, Maori English. Occupation, ways of speaking English that are associated with specific jobs or activities such as commerce, technology, education, and social life. For example, airline English, bureaucratic English, public school English, and business English. Then we have a combination of location and occupation. So these are varieties that are associated with not only where you are, but also the job that you have. So for example, American legal English, Australian medical English. And then finally, contact varieties. So these are hybrid varieties of English that are influenced by the local linguistic ecologies. For example, Franglais, Hinglish, Chinglish, and Spanglish. Alright, we're going to talk about Kachru, who is a scholar of global Englishes and the first to pioneer the idea of world English or Englishes. He explained the development of world Englishes in the following diagram called Kachru circles. And these are Kachru circles. So we've got the expanding circle, the outer circle, and the inner circle. Alright, the inner circle is countries where English is spoken as a native language. And if we look at the inner circle here, it's pretty straightforward. It includes the USA, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, anywhere where we know that English is the predominant language, and we would expect to be able to go there and speak English to pretty much anyone. The outer circle is regular users of English as a second language. English use in these countries usually stems from colonialism, and English may be listed as an official language. So if we look at the outer circle here, we've got Hong Kong, Bangladesh, Ghana, India, Kenya, Malaysia, so on. These are places that more often than not were colonized by England, so they have quite a historical connection to English in that country, and it was probably still used in some capacity as an official language, even though it might be in conjunction with other official languages as well. And then the expanding circle is speakers of English as a foreign language. So English in these countries is taught as a foreign language and it doesn't have any official status. So that includes countries like China, Egypt, Indonesia, Israel, Japan, Korea, and so on. This is just another way of looking at how Englishes are categorized. So we've got all of the different kind of groupings in these little wedges here. So if we look at the Australian, New Zealand, South Pacific Standard English wedge, we've got a whole lot of different Englishes that belong to that categorization. So Australian English, Aboriginal English, New Zealand English, Maori English, Tokpisin. So there's all these different subgroups of Australian, New Zealand, and South Pacific English that kind of can be grouped together, and we say that they have similar features. Alright, I'd like you to pause the video here and complete the language policy investigation task that's on Google Classroom, please. Okay, we're going to look at native Englishes now. So we're looking at the inner circle. If we're thinking about Kachru's Kachru circles, we're looking at the inner one. Alright, so native Englishes, as I just said, belong to the innermost of Kachru circles. They're the countries which are traditionally associated with English. Different mixes of original dialects, the different dates of settlement, the different settlement patterns, and the contact with Indigenous languages have meant that varieties in places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, and South Africa are already quite distinct from each other. The physical separation from other English-speaking regions has allowed this distinctiveness to flourish, and that's why if we think about Australian English and New Zealand English, they're more similar to each other than Australian English is to South African English, for example, because we are physically closer to New Zealand and we share a lot more of our linguistic features because of that. Okay, I'd like you to pause the video here and complete the which English task, please. Alright, so what creates distinctiveness between varieties of English? They're all fluent in standard Englishes, but they're all different. Why? So these are some of the reasons. Globalization, American cultural imperialism, which basically means that we consider cultural things that come from America to be highly valued at least in Western society around the world. So, for example, we're more likely to go and see a movie that's come out of Hollywood than we are to go and see an Australian movie. Immigration, global trade, and global politics are influences as well. Alright, so some of the influences on Australian English. What about conflict between native Englishes? So the Americanization of English in Australia is often discussed in newspapers, in the media and so on, and they're always talking about how Australian English is under siege from Americanization. We're losing some of our Australian features because of the influence of features from America. So some of these influences include phonological changes, so it could be features of stress, for example saying address instead of address, and the flapping of t. For example, atom is pronounced more like Adam. Syntactic changes, for example, to protest something instead of to protest against something. And lexical changes, for example, vanilla extract instead of vanilla essence. However, our lexicon does still remain most strongly aligned to British English, so this is probably changing the least overall. Okay, I'd like you to pause here and complete the influences on Australian English task on the Google Classroom.